You're watching Station Zero. You're watching Retro Rewind on Station Zero. Don't watch it alone. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the masterful use of horror in Jurassic Park. Hope you enjoy. Jurassic Park is an American science fiction media franchise centered on the disastrous attempt to create a theme park full of cloned dinosaurs. The film roared into theaters on June 11, 1993, and was based on the story by Michael Crichton. Upon its release, the film was an instant success, captivating the minds of millions of viewers across the world and introducing them to creatures that have long since been lost to time. The premise of the film involved the idea of bringing back extinct animals using genetic engineering and reintroducing them into the 21st century, and the devastating effects that would have on our world. While technically not a horror film outright, Jurassic Park blurs the lines between suspense and horror extremely well, teetering on the latter and using the former to build up to the horrific sequences. Our first example of which can be seen in the opening sequence of the film, where we are introduced to the game warden of the park, Robert Muldoon, and his team, who are loading in a new velociraptor into its paddock. The scene itself is shot during dusk, with dark blues overtaking the shots and bathing them in an extremely moody and unsettling atmosphere. As the first shot opens, we can see the branches of the nearby flora shaking furiously, and the park workers staring on in fear, unsure of what is about to break through the tree line. As we see the large storage container push through the trees, we can only guess what might be withheld inside of it, as it is maneuvered toward the loading bay, and we are told that the workers must have their tasers on full charge, informing us that the creature inside is dangerous. The animal hisses and squeals, startling the workers nearby and building up the suspense for the audience as we continue to wonder what might lie inside of the container. As the loading team docks the container onto the paddock, one of the workers, Joffrey, is assigned to raise the gate, which he proceeds to do. As the gate slowly rises, John Williams' score can be heard in the background, building up and up, before the animal in the cage charges at the open container, knocking Joffrey off of it and causing him to land hard onto the dirt ground. Before long, he is abruptly yanked toward the front of the container by the creature, which is screaming an ear-piercing scream as Joffrey yells out in pain. The workers try desperately to subdue the creature, tasering it over and over, to no avail. And this is when we get a glimpse of the eye of the animal, intercut with the horrified expression of Robert Muldoon's face, who is trying desperately to hold on to his coworker, until eventually the animal manages to rip Joffrey out of his arms. This inciting incident sets the stage for the entire film going forward by introducing us to the velociraptors, which, at this point, remained unknown and unseen by the audience, only revealing to us that the creature inside was smart, deadly, and dangerous. Upon meeting paleontologists Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler, who are in the midst of digging up a velociraptor skeleton in Montana, we are given a very important piece of exposition from Alan Grant, who explains to us just how deadly velociraptors actually were.
Try to imagine yourself in the Cretaceous period. You get your first look at this 6-foot turkey as you enter a clearing. He moves like a bird, lightly bobbing his head. And you keep still because you think that maybe his visual acuity is based on movement, like T-Rex. He'll lose you if you don't move, but no, not Velociraptor. You stare at him, and he just stares right back. And that's when the attack comes, not from the front, but from the side. From the other two raptors, you didn't even know were there.
This exact scenario can be seen later in the film with Robert Muldoon's death scene, which we will discuss later on in this video. The next time we are shown a velociraptor is during the hatchery sequence, where our main characters are gathered around the incubation chamber, observing a juvenile emerging from its egg, screeching out its first cry, to which Alan Grant asks, in a distraught tone,
What species is this?
to which he is given the answer that it's a velociraptor, much to his horror. We are then shown the full body of a cow being hoisted into the velociraptor paddock before we hear the disturbing screams of the creatures, viciously ripping off flesh from the cow, which is screaming in pain and agony. As we are thrown into the next scene, we are again introduced to Robert Muldoon. When the harness raises, we are shown just how deadly the velociraptors are, as the metal beams begin breaking apart and the tattered harness is now empty of the once living cow as our characters stare on in horror. Our next fantastic use of suspense and horror is shown during the T-Rex breakout scene, where the build-up to the reveal of the Tyrannosaurus is genius, with the ripples of the water signaling the animal's arrival. The lack of music also enhances the scene, as we can only hear the low rumbles and stomps of the creature in the distance, and the endless downpouring sheets of rain hammering down hard onto the cars. We get a very clever placed jump scare when the bloody leg of the goat slams down hard onto the roof of the car, with blood spattering everywhere, and this is when we get our first real look at the T-Rex. We are shown the sheer terror on Donald Gennaro's face through the blood on the roof of the car as he runs off in horror, leaving behind both Lex and Tim, with Lex screaming over and over that he left them. As the thunder cracks overhead, we can see the Tyrannosaurus testing the electrified fence with its arm, showing us that the animal is intelligent to some extent. Before the Rex chomps through the wires of its paddock and breaks through, roaring in triumph, Lex turns on a flashlight in the backseat of the vehicle, alerting the animal to their presence. All the while, Grant and Tim are screaming for her to turn the light off before it's too late. The Rex is now over top of them. As Tim carefully tries to close the door of the cruiser, he alerts the Rex once more, and it roars an ear-splitting roar before proceeding to smash through the glass roof of the car. The screams of horror can genuinely be seen and heard on the child actors' faces as a shard of glass breaks off from the corner of the skylight, which wasn't supposed to happen, selling the scene even more. Not to mention that they actually used a life-size 4-ton T-Rex animatronic, so the entire sequence looks extremely real. The Rex manages to push the car onto its side while Alan Grant and Ian Malcolm decide to use flares to distract the animal. Lex and Tim scream in pain as shards of glass begin digging into them while they are underneath the body of the car, with the Rex standing on top of it, causing the metal of the car to bust in on itself and mud to pour in on the roof of the car. Grant manages to avert the attention of the Rex away from the tour vehicle and move it away to a separate part of the paddock, only for it to change course and head in the direction of Malcolm, who is running with the flare. We are told earlier on in the film that the T-Rex's visual acuity is based on movement, and they can't see you if you don't move. And Alan Grant screams at Malcolm
Ian, freeze!
to which he ignores and is chased down by the animal before being slammed into the restroom stall that Gennaro is in, breaking Malcolm's leg and leaving behind a bloody sight. As Gennaro sits there, staring up at the towering animal, he is mumbling over and over under his breath, before the Rex chomps down on him and shakes him like a rag doll, snapping his spine and bones as the Rex proceeds to devour him. Cut to the cruiser as Alan Grant tries desperately to get Tim out of the bottom of the car before Lex screams a horrified scream and the Rex makes its way back to them. Grant quickly covers her mouth to shield her scream, and the Rex peers down at them menacingly. As Grant and Lex try staying still, the Rex sniffs them out and again uses its intelligence to make them move by headbutting the back of the car, causing it to turn and knock them off of their feet. Lex and Grant are forced to abandon Tim and climb over the edge of the paddock, holding on to the fallen electrified fencing while the Rex begins pushing the car over the cliff. We get some nice use of suspense as Grant struggles to grab the other piece of wire so the car doesn't land on top of them. He finally manages to grab a hold of the other wire just as the car plunges over the cliff and lands inside of a tree where we're to suspect that Tim almost certainly died from the fall, showing us that not even the kids are safe and that anyone could die at any moment. Shortly thereafter, we follow Dennis Nedry, who managed to confiscate some of the dinosaur DNA from the cryogenic freezers with the goal of smuggling them off of the island for the rival genetics company Biosyn, ran by Lewis Dodson. Upon making his way through the rain-soaked jungle, he soon loses control of his car and smashes it into a nearby paddock. As he exits the vehicle and slips down the steep incline, he loses his glasses, making it more difficult for him to see where he is. As he attempts to tie the vehicle's winch around a tree, a soft hooting sound can be heard in the distance before we get a glimpse of the animal's legs hopping across the grass, building up even more suspense for the audience as we wonder what kind of dinosaur he is about to run into. We finally get a better look at the animal as it pokes its head out from behind the tree that Nedry is tying the winch to, and he informs us that he thought it was one of his big brothers, teasing us that the creature before him is not yet fully grown. After attempting to distract the animal with a stick, he dismisses it and begins making his way back up the mud-soaked hillside. After struggling up the hill, more hooting sounds can be heard as he turns around, only to find that the same animal has been following him. Its appearance is somewhat docile, and us as the audience don't think much of it until it proceeds to hiss and expose its sizable frill, spitting black venom from its mouth, which was teased earlier on during the tour. The black goo lands on Nedry's jacket, and he quickly stands up, racing to his car before turning around to face the animal, only to be blinded even more as the creature spits even more black venom into his eyes, causing him to slam his face off of the side of the Jeep and tumble to the ground, dropping the Barbasol can containing the dinosaur embryos. When Nedry stands up again and manages to get inside of the vehicle, all seems well until we hear the same unsettling hiss, and just in the corner of the screen can the edges of the frill be seen, before the camera pans and we see another, larger Dilophosaurus waiting inside of the car before it proceeds to attack Nedry ferociously. The camera pans away as we are to imagine what the animal is doing to him. All the while, his horrified screams fill up the background noise, and the scene ends. The next time we catch a glimpse of the Tyrannosaurus is back at the T-Rex paddock where a now conscious Malcolm is sitting in the back of a Jeep, mumbling to himself, and we again hear the thudding footsteps of the Rex approaching with the same rippling water on the ground below, keying us into the fact that the Tyrannosaurus is returning. When Ellie and Muldoon reappear from the tree line, Malcolm is frantically motioning for them to come back to the Jeep, and the music is slowly building up in the background before the Rex smashes through the trees, roaring viciously. Muldoon quickly puts the car in drive and pulls off down the road with the Rex following closely behind them. We can hear Malcolm telling them that they
must go faster
as the Rex begins gaining on them until they reach a large turned-over tree, where the Rex proceeds to smash through the tree with ease and lets out another terrifying roar nearly inches away from them, and Ellie screams in horror before Muldoon shifts gears and manages to outspeed the Rex, which slowly scampers off into the undergrowth. Later on in the film, after the power to the park has been shut down thanks to Dennis Nedry and the raging hurricane, the velociraptors manage to escape their enclosure, unbeknownst to our characters. When Ray Arnold volunteers to turn on the power manually from a nearby maintenance shed, he is not heard from for quite some time before Ellie Sattler chooses to go investigate with the help of Robert Muldoon. It is then that we are told just how in danger they are now that the velociraptors are out on the island.
The shutdown must have turned off all the fences. Damn it, even Nedry knew better than to mess with the raptor fences.
As the pair make their way to the maintenance shed, Muldoon suddenly stops, declaring to Ellie that they are being hunted, before ordering her to run, and the music from the score kicks in with shrieking violins as Ellie barely manages to make it to the maintenance shed. Inside, we are greeted with extremely claustrophobic corridors leading down deeper underground, playing into the ornate human fears of claustrophobia, darkness, and basements. As Ellie struggles to maneuver her way through the passageway with the help of John Hammond and Ian Malcolm, she soon manages to find the backup power station and turn back on the power to the park, only to be met with one of the most well-timed jump scares of all time, when we finally get our first real look at a velociraptor, which is snarling and screeching at her as it frantically tries to break free from the tangled mess of wires that it is trapped in. Ellie screams in terror and manages to hide behind a nearby fence, locking the animal out before she is slightly relieved as Ray Arnold reaches for her from behind a large yellow pipe, or so she believes, until the amputated bloody stump of Ray Arnold's arm falls to the floor and the velociraptor behind her claws and bites at the fence, tearing it off. As Ellie runs frantically back down the narrow passageway to the entrance, loud footsteps and snarls can be heard chasing close behind her, before she slams the door to the maintenance shed shut and locks the exterior gate, crying profusely. Meanwhile, Robert Muldoon eyes what he thinks is a lone raptor lying in the brush, and he takes aim with his SPAS 12 shotgun before Alan Grant's monologue plays out before our very eyes. As a second velociraptor emerges from the foliage on the side, snarling its menacing, grotesque teeth at Muldoon before abruptly pouncing on him as he screams in pain before he is viciously ripped to shreds. After walking for miles across the island, Alan, Lex, and Tim manage to make it back to the visitor center before Alan tells them that he'll be right back and for them to stay put. Upon doing so, the siblings' feasts are soon interrupted as the silhouette of a raptor can be seen maneuvering its way toward them. As the pair manage to make their way into the kitchen of the visitor center, they are soon greeted at the doorway by the menacing hisses from the velociraptor before it snarls and fogs up the window. Meanwhile, these scenes are intercut with dialogue from the characters held up in the bunker where Ellie confirms that the third raptor should be contained.
I must have figured out how to open doors.
Before we are met with the unnerving image of the scaly hand of the velociraptor pushing the handle of the door down and bashing the door open with its skull, letting out an ear-piercing call. Suddenly, a second raptor makes its way into the doorway and pushes its way into the room. As Lex and Tim begin to get more and more frightened, then the two of them decide to maneuver their way through the kitchen, crawling on their hands and knees. The soft tap of the raptor claw against the floor helps to send a shiver down the audience's spines, and the animals nearly making eye contact with them force you to the edge of your seat. And as the two raptors narrowly encounter Timmy, Lex decides to distract them by slamming a metal spoon onto the ground and hiding herself inside of an empty cabinet. When one of the raptors screeches and charges toward her reflection, it smashes its face against another metal cabinet and falls to the ground. Timmy decides to make a run for it, only to be chased by the second raptor, which aggressively chases him into the freezer. He slips and slides all over the floor, building up the suspense of the sequence as the velociraptor is screeching over and over again, before Lex manages to snatch her little brother and run out of the kitchen, only to be watched menacingly by the first raptor. As the kids reunite with Alan and Ellie in the visitor center, they are followed by the raptors into the control room where Alan finally gets a good look at the creature before it jimmies the door handle and slams hard into the door, nearly knocking Grant over before he manages to hold it back. All the while, the score is getting more and more intense as Lex desperately tries to find the right file on the computer to the park. Meanwhile, Grant is struggling to hold back the heavy-set beast as Ellie comes to his aid, unable to pick up the shotgun lying on the ground. Lex finally manages to find the right file and the locking mechanisms engaged, until we hear the terrified voice of Ellie scream out.
It's gonna come through the glass!
And we hear gunshots on the other end of the line, and Hammond's face filling with fear before the velociraptor subsequently smashes through the glass, landing on the computer desk and snarling with menace. It begins searching the room for our main characters. The DNA-numbered sequence can be seen illuminated all over the animal's face, showing that this creature is one born out of genetic manipulation and man's quest to recreate the past, but to devastating effects. We get another jump scare when Lex is crawling through the overhead vents as the raptor slams its head through the top of the vent, causing it to collapse and Lex to nearly fall onto the ground with it, where she would have most certainly have died. As she is lifted back up, the raptor narrowly misses taking a chunk out of her leg before our characters rush forward through the rest of the vents. Upon arriving in the main entrance of the visitor center, they are met with another raptor which fiercely hisses at them and jumps onto the fossilized remains in the center of the room, causing them to break apart in several places and our characters to each fall one by one to the floor. As the group rallies together, they are cornered by the first raptor, which appears from underneath a see-through tarp and yet again grants warning about the velociraptor's behavior as shown, with them being cornered on both sides by the animals. Just as one of the raptors is about to pounce on them, however, they are stopped abruptly by the T-Rex seen earlier on in the movie, and our characters manage to escape the visitor center while the Rex kills both of the raptors, roaring triumphantly. I remember watching this film as a kid and not being able to finish it the first time when the raptors were stalking the children in the kitchen. I went back a second time and tried to watch the full thing through, which I managed to do, and it's when I fell in love with the franchise because of the scares and those edge-of-your-seat moments. Looking back, Jurassic Park can almost definitely be classified as a horror film. The creatures in the film all act like real animals, hunting for survival in the case of the Tyrannosaur and the Dilophosaurus, or protecting its territory with the Velociraptors. Each animal feels real with their motives and reasons for stalking, killing, or injuring our characters. It's something that I believe is lacking from the newer Jurassic World films, where the animals act more like monsters, mindlessly killing people for no particular reason other than for a cool set piece, until the short battle at Big Rock came out, where I believe they recaptured some of that suspense and horror not seen since the original trilogy. But we'll delve into that in a separate video. For now, I want to discuss why I believe that Jurassic Park has a masterful use of horror and spine-tingling suspense. Every scare sequence in the film is earned with phenomenal build-up. The obscured appearance of the Velociraptor at the start of the film makes for some great mystery as we, the audience, want to know what this creature looks like that is absolutely eviscerating the park's worker with no remorse whatsoever. We are later told about the raptor's attack pattern and fierceness by both Alan Grant and Robert Muldoon, who are both equally terrified as well as intrigued. The next time we see the Velociraptors, more like hear them, is when we are shown how they are fed. A singular cow hoisted up on a metal harness and lowered into the enclosure as the terrifying screams of the raptors as well as the cow can be heard. All the while, our cast of characters looks on in terror and disgust as an animal is getting mauled right before their very eyes. As the crane rises, we can see just how deadly these animals are, massacring the cow and completely ripping it off of the harness in a little less than a few minutes, with no trace of it left behind, apart from the spatters of blood scattered across the harness. When we reach the Tyrannosaur paddock, the sequence has such an amazing build-up with the water ripples and silent score. The look of terror on the characters' faces says it all as we are introduced to the tyrant lizard itself as it manages to break free from its containment area and wreak havoc on the tour vehicle with the kids inside. Not to mention the fantastic callback to the beginning of the film when Grant informs us about the Rex's lack of sight, only to be outsmarted by it as it knocks them off of their feet and forces them to move, before plummeting Timmy off of the cliff into the foliage below, showing us that no one is safe. Dennis Nedry's death scene is one of the best built-up scenes in the movie, with the slow camera movements and haunting hooting sounds from the Dilophosaurus, before we see what we think is a harmless little theropod, only to be proven horribly wrong when its frill extends and the creature switches from cute to deadly in a millisecond. And just when we think everything is okay, the rug is pulled out from under us as another, bigger brother is shown inside of the car, which most likely snuck in while Nedry was attaching the wench at the bottom of the hill and viciously mauls him to death. The scenes that really show how much of a horror film Jurassic Park is, however, are all of the scenes in the third act with the velociraptors. First, we get the haunting culmination of everything we have heard before from the characters about how deadly the velociraptors are, when we see that their paddock has been viciously ripped open with multiple footprints leading into the jungle. Before long, our suspicions are confirmed when Muldoon informs Ellie that they're being hunted, which really sends a shiver down your spine, only to be even more on edge when Ellie traverses the underground maintenance shed by herself, the claustrophobic corridors leading to some fantastically unsettling moments, with the audience wondering if something could be lurking down there with her. When our suspicions are confirmed by the terrifying appearance of the raptor behind the wires and the score by Williams upping the fear factor, this is really when the film goes straight horror, culminating into the best sequence in the film, the kitchen scene with Lex and Tim. As you put yourself in their shoes, you start to ask yourself what you would do if you were being hunted by bloodthirsty 6-foot-tall killers. As the scene carries on and the slightest sounds put the audience on edge, from the pans falling on top of our characters as they desperately try to move down the aisles, the spoon dropping to the ground alerting the raptors of their presence, and the ear-piercing shriek of the raptor as it spots Lex inside of the cabinet makes for great suspense. And this is the sequence that solidifies Jurassic Park as a fantastic horror film, and is one of the main reasons that I fell in love with the franchise. Do you think that Jurassic Park is a horror film? And if so, what was your favorite horror scene in the film? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And turn on the bell to be up to date on our latest uploads. And remember, don't change the channel.